Welcome to this episode of Abide in Me, How Jesus Models Secure Attachment with God. This series is a survey of the Gospel of Mark, looking for how Jesus models what is now called secure attachment, which is the physiological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual experience of what is often called salvation or regeneration or being conjoined with God or enlightenment, individuation, even becoming spiritual. Through the series, we will discover the benefits of becoming securely attached with God, which is the transformation of one's life into one of joy and satisfaction.
We continue our review of the second chapter of Gospel of Mark, and we come upon some practices, behaviors, beliefs that are 2,000 years old and literally have no equivalent in our world today. And not to be skipped over, though, right? I am continuing to look for how Jesus' behavior and teaching is showing us a model of how to live a securely attached life. And we refer back to the premise that love is the energy in life and that Jesus is tapped into that energy. And he's an example of that. And so based on that, we have these four things that happen in this section of Mark chapter 2. First of all, a group of people come up to Jesus and points out that all the Pharisees were fasting, but Jesus was not. And they're asking, why don't you fast? Right? Like a criticism, but maybe they were wondering, hey, this fasting is, difficult. Well, fasting at the time was required in order to be a righteous person. So we're going to run into this again in the future where you've got the 1% of people who had the time and energy and resources to do all these behaviors perfectly. And fasting would have been one of them. I mean, can you imagine the fishermen that are following Jesus now taking a day off to fast when they needed to be fishing? So we're going to run into that here in a minute. So Jesus' response is fasting. Well, look, when you go to a wedding party, do they fast when the groom is there? Of course not. They don't fast during the party. And so he's likening himself to being the groom, the special person that they are supposed to be having this wonderful party with. And he said, that someday I'll be gone and then you can fast. And then he goes on to say, would you patch old clothing with new cloth? Well, no, because the new piece would shrink and that would rip away from the old cloth, right? And finally, he says, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. The wine was carried around in leather wineskins, and you poured the new wine, which is not completely fermented, into a new wineskin, and it stretches, and it's fine. But once the wineskin is stretched, if you put new wine into it, when it ferments, it will burst the wineskin. And then finally, a great challenge to the cultural norms. Jesus and the apostles are walking along and they're in a wheat field. At the edge of the field, there's unharvested wheat. And they just put their hand out and pull heads from the wheat and pop them in their mouth and chew. It's kind of interesting experience of eating that way, but they did it on the Sabbath, and that was called evil. Okay. So we have these behaviors that were defining people as being in the tribe or out, good or evil. And there were these metaphors that Jesus was using to illustrate that there is an inner life, an inner experience that should be driving us, not cultural norms or our old habits even, or our cognitive process we're so used to. We grow, right? And when we are an adolescent, we experience puppy love, right? But then we've all experienced that becoming romantic love. And then hopefully you've experienced the development of that romantic love into actual relationship, deeper relationship, a spiritual tie, a secure attachment. So that's normal growth. Jesus is pointing out here that we can become stuck in the mere behaviors and thinking that is the achievement we're trying to get to. And we become relying on those behaviors. But of course, they don't hold up. A previous staged way of managing life is not appropriate for a later stage. It just doesn't work. It could tear things apart. Like when you, again, in your youth, maybe you were dramatic and insistent. I remember telling my father that we were going to start this commune and it was going to be great and it was going to change the world, right? And that insistence, that dogmatism, that know-it-all is not appropriate in the later stage when you're trying to create a relationship with someone. And we come into new stages of life, and they bring with them their wisdom. Merely experiencing life gives us a deeper understanding of what life is about that is appropriate to that new stage of life. And if we are seeking to change that and the culture is against us, or somebody is challenging us, what do we do with this new wisdom? Do we let it blow up our life? So Jesus is modeling this rising above the usual concerns we have, our normal cognitive processes, our normal emotional reactivity, and seeing them all from above, within, from a deeper place, based on our normal living. Now, Jesus didn't have the language that we have these days for brain science, but he nonetheless was observing that what is driving us in our life, or what ought to be driving us in our life, is this seeking relationship and expecting there to be joy in that connection. And so many wise teachers are pointing out that this is what is real. This experience of joy, of connection, is what is real, not these exterior expectations or achievements or definitions created by the world, and certainly not by our own false self or our wounded self that imposes suffering on us. That first example of fasting is suffering. And of course, there's going to be suffering in life. And yet, suffering does not cause joy. It is going through the suffering that brings us to a place of joy. But, the culture could get to the point, I remember learning this more or less explicitly, that suffering was it. If you're suffering, oh, then you're a good person, right? No, not really. An example that comes to mind is you probably know someone who complains a lot. I had a coworker. I would come to them with an idea, and the first thing out of their mouth was, no, it's not going to work. And then the second and third things out of their mouths was, and so let's do it this way. No, but there had to be that complaint. Let's say that complaining is coming from a deeper wound that gives them anxiety about the future, right? And they've got to manage that anxiety, and they do it by complaining or pushback right from the get-go. But they have this anxiety about the future and how it's going to work out. So when someone comes to them and suggests that they would be happier people in life if they would stop complaining, which the complaint might be legitimate, right? But when they're told that they would be happier if they stopped complaining, the initial reaction is going to feel, they're going to say, now wait, you can't impose upon me your expectations or your way of life. You can't demand that of me. It's not appropriate to dismiss my concerns, my anxiety for the future. By the way, that's not how God treats us, right? That's not how love flows. Love is unconditional and provides for all the love that is possible among all the people. And we feel separated from this love, and here it's called evil, when we complain, when we first blame the circumstances for our woes, or when we first blame God for our woes, when we say that the rules are supposed to carry us through this and blah, blah, blah. And that's not how God operates. He does not step in to change us, adding new cloth or new wine. Rather, we go through this process whereby we accept the reality. So Jesus is saying, hey, listen to this metaphor here. Look what's going on here. And accept that reality in a way that gives us just a little bit of capacity to change, to let go of an old idea, to challenge an emotional reaction that we have to something, to increase a little bit more safe, to acknowledge what's going on here, and perhaps an opportunity to let it go. So that is the one way of seeing how Jesus, again, is coming from this place of secure attachment. And how does he teach people this? Well, he uses these now 2,000-year-old metaphors. How do we learn from the source, from the flow of love, that there is this new way of being? The next example in the Gospel of Mark. And then we come to this seemingly random story that is a very powerful message about self-care versus selfishness versus the world's expectations of us. They are walking along, and it's on the Sabbath, which is an important point. And they do this odd thing where they grab off the heads of the wheat grains, and you rub it between your hands, and you get down to the wheat seed, and they put it in their mouth and would eat it. And you would get the benefit of it, and it would become a gummy-like substance, and you'd spit it out. And the Pharisees see this, and they say, they're breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath. They were just trying to get some food. Again, this is such an old thing. What in the world does that mean? So I'm looking at it and saying, well, Jesus is recognizing that our self-care comes from a recognition that we make what is important in our life run our lives. So the Sabbath is a symbol for not just rest, but teaching. It's a metaphor for the perfect conditions in which we experience connecting to God or to another person, the perfect conditions to experience joy. And the benefit of the experience is received at any moment that the Sabbath rules are applied. When we take from our own initiative, from within ourselves, following the rules of self-care. Now, that's not rules imposed upon you by someone else. So again, Jesus is saying, look, these rules, these Sabbath rules are a spiritual experience. They are not an imposition upon you that by obeying them, you become a good person. In modern times, people have expectations that we are going to perform a certain way. And if we don't perform that way, they look down on us. And that's a cultural trope that's very common. The securely attached person, when they experience this deep appreciation of their own value, when they feel connected to their source, when they are able to love others because they feel lovable and love themselves, they come into that circumstance, which is perfect for becoming securely attached to God, to other people, experiencing joy. It's very difficult for people who are afraid of looking bad or coming from an emotional wound or an attachment wound, which demands that they be a certain way in order to be liked. That's mine. Very difficult then to take care of yourself and remember this connection and being lovable and being able to love. Now, we're all afraid some of the time, right? We've all got some attachment wounds of some sort. So it is our task to pay attention to when we notice that people's expectations and the norms of the world begin driving us rather than on our path, we do what is necessary to take care of ourselves. So now, this is difficult to pull off, just as it was difficult for the Pharisees and others to believe Jesus, that they felt like Jesus was just throwing off all these rules that were so important to holding people together and to making them a tribe and showing themselves as being righteous. It's hard to turn our minds to a new way of being. Most of us realize that we cannot force other people to do things. We can't force people to love God, right? And many of us will have considerable anxiety about being loved. And yet we know we can't demand it of other people. It's blatant coercion or something. There's a lot of passive aggressive people out there. There's, a lot of borderline mental health issues that are connected, I believe, to these deeper wounds coming even from our childhood. And this is the evil that is being referred to here, the eating on the Sabbath, working or harvesting on the Sabbath. We can be that way without observing it. And the prospect of noticing and labeling our ways of being as being insufficient, as being self-defeating, as being dysfunctional is frightening. It's giving up this comfortable way of being. And often I avoid going to the effort of making that observation and that assessment and that lightening of the weight of the rule. And Jesus is modeling for us in such a helpful way. And he's recognizing that there is this spiritual environment that we all live in that continues to provide the perfect circumstances for us to experience God's love, others' love, and our ability to love others. He's modeling for us how we think about this, how we speak about it, and even how we approach some of our behaviors so that we can imagine what it is to be in that peace, in that assurance, in that sense of worth. Through the process, we discover how to honestly and deeply look at ourselves without shaming ourselves, without condemning ourselves, even though we're letting go of some rule that has been important to us our whole lives and worked well in the past, but that now we need to take on for ourselves rather than having it be imposed upon us, which means we're going to tweak it to fit our wisdom and our love. We experience then a freedom to let go of thoughts and feelings that are so self-limiting and dependent on culture and addictive, that separate us from God. And we're left with this sense of peace and rest, right, which is the origin of Sabbath, and sense of in the flow, on the path, on the way, and being led at the same time as we are following the rules, because it is love from within that is motivating us. So I want to begin every day with a practice that for more or less amount of time brings to mind the abundance and constant presence of God's love, that it is appropriate for this moment, that it is feeding this new stage of life, that it is not regulated from without, but that the rules are coming from within, and they are the rules of love. It reminds me that I am loved and that I'm capable of loving. And it sets in my mind the intention to live for this connection to God and to others. The promise is that I will experience this secure attachment and will, in that perfect circumstance, feel joyful and satisfied.
I pray this has supported your transformative life, whatever practice you have in your life. I want to thank Solomon Keel for his music, and I want to invite you to make a contribution to this work if you wish and are able through the PayPal link. And I invite you to continue to listen to the next episode. You be well.